It's like this. You know, I look in my classroom and I have 30 students, and I take their weight, and it's 150 pounds on average. 5 years later, I get them back in the room, assuming no one's left or closed down in this scenario. So they all come back, and the average is 150 pounds. Meanwhile, that person gained 100 pounds, that person lost 50 pounds, and that one. I mean, this is nonsense. This is not a methodology you could ever use to answer the question. So number one, no economic model. Number two, they use a methodology that can't answer the interesting economic question. Why do they do this? We might probably gather pretty easily. Number three, and I've written extensively on this in other places, and that is they just either ignore the contrary evidence. The paper I quoted at the beginning by Shalupka and Erickson, they don't even cite any of the 12 papers or so that I've published in this area. You know, you just ignore it. You don't even raise it. Why would you want to talk about it, I guess? This is what they say: the vast majority of scientific evidence indicates there's no negative economic effect. This is despite the fact that tobacco industry-sponsored research has attempted to create fears to the contrary. Interestingly, they never talk about pharmaceuticals having a vested interest or public health authorities who fund many of these studies. I guess they get a pass, as we say. Tobacco control, which in the United States, over 5.3 billion in real dollars, spent just over the years 2000 to 2007. Many of these dollars are used to fund studies that say up front, we will fund studies that show that our programs are effective. Yes. In other words, we know the answer, just show us how to show the answer and prove it. This is not hypothesis testing. This is not science. But seemingly it's not very interesting that all their studies always show the same thing. I guess they start with the same answer. Now, this is the more recent stuff that I've been working with. And I've been working with the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons who have a keen interest in the epidemiological issues as well as the economics, so I've been trying to put the things together. So I've written elsewhere, and I don't think it's any secret in this room, that the risks from ETS or secondhand smoke are somewhat overstated. I'll allow it for someone else to tell us to the degree. The most recent foray that we've been seeing into this is that you impose a smoking ban, and then almost immediately there are dramatic reductions in AMI incidence. In fact, somewhere between 6 and 47%. It sounds pretty good to me. I mean, sign me up, I guess. But what's the evidence? And I'm going to look at the IOM. So the Institute of Medicine in Washington, D.C. had a study that was funded by our CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And so what they did was to look at 11 so-called scientific studies. So I'll talk just about a few of the flaws because we don't have all week. Number one, they base it on too few studies. They base it on 11 studies. They ignore the most comprehensive study done by economists in the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, which is very prestigious. And the NBER looked across the United States, and I forget the exact number of locations, but just so far outnumbers all the studies that the IOM looked at multiplied by, I don't know, 1,000. And what they found was that, and this is in the Shetty et al. Paper, that smoking bans do not have any effect when you take this comprehensive data set on AMI incidence. Not only that, they then looked at the sample properties, and they found that if you were to put all the locations across the United States into this hat, so you got a population, you're as likely to draw out of that hat a smoking ban causing a huge increase in AMI incidence as a reduction. So to statistician, you say cherry picking. You are baking into the cake the result by only choosing the ones that, or in either that or they drew out of the hat and somehow miraculously pulled out 11, you know, which, you know, if they are that good, they should be gambling, I guess, you know, but maybe they're good at that. So it's not a random draw. Number two, so here we have these 11 so-called scientific studies. Only 2 of the 11 studies examined the AMI incidence of non-smokers. So 9 out of the 11, they had no idea who they were looking at, were they smokers or non-smokers. It would seem to me that, you know, these hospital admissions, you'd want to kind of know that answer. Because if you're really worried about secondhand smoke, I assume it's the non-smokers you're more interested in than the smokers, but maybe not. Number 3, there was no information in any of these studies on the duration or pattern of ETS exposure. So it could be that the person had, you know, lived by themselves in a tent for 25 years or something and came in with an AMI, or it could have been that, you know, they had a spouse who was smoking 150 cigarettes a day. I don't know. It would seem to make perhaps a difference to their study. Sorry, we didn't have the data, couldn't do it, I guess was the response. It would seem to be a very important issue. Number 4, there is no direct evidence of ETS risk. They admitted it in their IOM report. So what did they do? They used inferred evidence from other sources. Now, I'm not that good of an epidemiologist to pull off that study. But in any event, they have no direct evidence on ETS risk. So I don't know how they're drawing the conclusions that they do, but I guess they feel comfortable doing so. Maybe because they know the answer already. Number 5, they're not controlling for anything else. They're not controlling for the weight of the person, the age of the person. Do they exercise? Do they eat 5 eggs every morning? You know, do they have cholesterol issues? Things that you would think might have some relevance to AMI incidence. Number 6, it's implausible. There are studies after 6 months that they show like a 47% reduction in AMI incidence? I mean, that's incredible. I mean, how could they get this past editors and referees and journals? Which is kind of interesting.